The jazz image here, it's a work in progress, and it's a special delivery system by way of analog and digital. And for those of you still operating with radios, AM and FM, and those of you streaming on the line somewhere between Helsinki, Finland, and Auckland, New Zealand, where perhaps it's another day over the international borderline. And of course, we hope we're sailing across the Eiffel Tower, Paris, where they're very allied to jazz, as well as our friends in the United Kingdom. Welcome, the Jazz Image here.
That, of course, was the unmistakable voice and poetry of legendary jazz broadcaster Leigh Kamman. He developed that inimitable style over a long career that started during his high school days at St. Paul Central, included the University of Minnesota, U.S. Army Radio during World War II, and radio stations in Duluth, Minneapolis, and New York City. Leigh knew and loved the American art form called jazz as much or better than any musician, which was incredible for someone that never played. And this production, the first of many, will present rare and historic air checks of Leigh interviewing the greats of jazz from the early years in New York City to his time spent in Minneapolis in the 1960s and 70s. We begin with pianists Oscar Peterson and Art Tatum from 1953 at WOV 1280 New York, where Leigh was known as the Little Bandmaster, hosting the 1280 Club for the preservation of good listening.
Just in case you're interested, the bandbox is new on the jazz scene here in New York, and here's a call to Circle CI 55970. The call is to the bandbox and to Oscar Peterson.
Bandbox.
Good evening, bandbox. May I speak with Oscar Peterson, please?
Who is this, Leigh?
Yeah, Leigh Kamman at WOV.
Yeah, one moment. Leigh, this is Bill Levine at the Rustic Cabin.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
All right.
How's your new operation doing?
Wonderful, Leigh.
Well, we're very glad to see it on the scene.
Yeah. Am I on the air now?
You're on the air, Bill.
Man, that's great.
That's great.
Oscar, I'm going to get Oscar Peterson for you now. Here's Oscar. Leigh.
Okay, be my guest.
Hello.
Hello, Oscar Peterson.
Yes.
This is Leigh Kamman. You and I are totally unknown to each other. I'm at the 1280 Club here in New York.
Yes.
And for many years I've been playing your records back to the old Canadian RCA Victors that you used to make, like the Sheik of Araby.
Yeah.
And we wanted to introduce you to the members of our Good Sounds Association over here.
Oh, wonderful.
We're glad to see you in the bandbox. I hope you're having a good kick there.
Well, we're having a wonderful reception down here.
I've always wondered, Oscar, who among all the pianists in the world was most influential as far as you were concerned in the development of your technique?
Well, I'd say three primarily. The president, Art Tatum.
He's in charge of all.
That's right.
Yes.
Nat Cole.
Nat Cole.
And Teddy Wilson.
And Teddy Wilson. Three outstanding gentlemen. How old are you, Oscar?
27.
You've been living, were you born in Canada?
Yes, I was born in Montreal.
In Montreal. You know, there's a fellow American over in Toronto now who's very outstanding. Have you ever met John Calvin Jackson?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think of his technique?
Tremendous. Calvin and I were good friends. As a matter of fact, I was indirectly responsible for his first appearance in Toronto when he decided to move up there.
Well, I think we here in the United States have lost a real creative guy. He's a wonderful arranger as well,
He certainly is. He's doing a lot of TV and radio work up there.
Well, that's good to hear that he has the opportunity. But, you know, we've had a wonderful exchange in having you down here.
Well, thanks.
Are you planning to stay here? Have you done any traveling overseas or anything?
Yes, well, every year I do this 60,000-mile tour with Norman Granz.
That's 60,000 miles, jet-propelled, huh?
And that's the way it ends up. Last year we went to Europe in March.
Did you meet any outstanding people over there?
Well, yes, I met Reinhold Svensson. I think he's known to a lot of the record collectors over here.
Yes, he's
also
one of the famous Swedish jazzmen.
That's right, and another famous pianist, Ben Hallberg, who's just a young kid. I think he's my favorite over there.
Yes, he's been featured a lot. Well, we have an international division here in the 1280 Club where we air out some of those sounds with guys like Bengt Hallberg and Rolf Eriksson and Reinhold Svensson. And then we do a roundup around the world from Australia to Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And all the songs and music that's been preserved on a record representing those countries. Well, we certainly have enjoyed talking to you.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
And we'd like to pledge you to the 1280 Club's Society for the Preservation of Good Sound.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks a lot.
And you know what? We're going to invite everybody that we can possibly call on within hearing distance right now to join you and Gene Krupa and Charlie Shavers and everyone else at the Bandbox.
Well, that's wonderful. I think they'll enjoy the show.
I know they will. Having seen it, it certainly is very refreshing, and it's full of a lot of different kind of music, ranging from one group to another.
That's right.
Well, thanks a lot, Oscar Peterson.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure talking to you and meeting you by way of phone.
Thanks a lot. Good night.
Good night, Oscar Peterson. Hello, may I speak with Art Tatum, please?
Yes, it is, Art.
Art, sorry to invade your privacy. I know you're a busy guy, but we conduct live on-the-air interviews by way of phone and proxy. We wanted the audience to meet you because we have so many people who listen to Art Tatum and have revered him during the years, and we wanted to talk to him personally.
Right.
How are you tonight?
Pretty good, Leigh.
I know there's one thing in particular that was mentioned in one of our party line calls the other night. Oscar Peterson, the young Canadian pianist, mentioned that, well, the three pianists that influenced him the most were Art Tatum, Nat Cole, and Teddy Wilson. We've always wondered who influenced you and inspired you to play the way you do.
Well, I can say that by saying Lee Sims and Fats Waller.
And they were the people that influenced you the most.
That's correct.
What did you like about Lee Sims, for example?
Well, I mean, he had a beautiful technique, and I mean, it was something that I had never heard before, so I guess that's, you know.
And how about Fats, the spirit of all things, huh?
Well, I mean, that goes without saying that a lot of people never knew the appreciation of Fats Waller, I mean, because of the fellow's entertainment ideas, but also he was a great pianist.
Do you like the modern style of piano as played by, well, say, such people as Bud Powell?
Yes, I appreciate, let's say, progressive jazz, or bop, as you might call it. However, I don't think it gives the left hand as much to do as it should.
Uh-huh, and that left hand belongs to you.
Well, I mean, that belongs to any pianist. I think it should, any good pianist should have two good hands.
I should say so. Well, you know, there seems to be quite a difference in the makeup and the personality of the modern musician and the gentleman of your school. What do you think about that? That is, there is a distinct difference. I don't know.
Oh, well, I don't know. I can't say on that. I wouldn't say that because I met some very, very nice young chaps around here, and they're very eager to get ahead, such as Oscar Peterson, whom I think is going to do a lot more. I don't think he's even reached his height yet.
Have you ever heard of a young American by the name of Calvin Jackson up in Toronto, Canada?
Yes, I know him very well. I've known him for a long time.
He's vastly underrated, isn't he?
Oh, I should say so.
And he's a great composer and arranger as well. Art, how long ago did you start in the music business? Must have been, what?
Oh, let's see. That's, if I tell you that, I'll have to be telling my age, which I'm 43 years old. And I started in Toledo, Ohio, say about 1924, 23, 24, when I was about 14 years old.
And did you play around radio stations in that area?
Yes, I did. WSBD, WTAM in Cleveland, SPD in Toledo, WWJ in Detroit.
Uh-huh.
So I've done quite a bit of that work.
I should say. Well, now, it certainly is an inspiration talking to you. Wish we had more time on the party line. It's almost 10 o'clock bandstand time over there. So we'd like to thank you very much for taking this time out.
It's a real pleasure. I mean, anytime I'd be glad to with you.
Come and visit the 1280 Club, WOV, New York.
All right, bye.
We'd love to visit with you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
After Leigh moved back to Minneapolis-St. Paul in the late 1950s, he worked for a number of radio stations, including WLOL, WCCO, KSTP, KQRS, and KSJN. Our next interview is with clarinetist and bandleader Woody Herman on Leigh Kamman's KSTP Jazz Corner Party Line.
Woody Herman is on the Jazz Corner party line. Woodrow Charles Woody Herman, are you there?
Yes, I am, Leigh. How are you?
Fine. It's a long time since we've been talking together. I'm sure there are at least 10 years between here and the last time.
Well, it's a good thing we got together now.
I should say so. You've been covering everything from country clubs to one-nighters, I know.
Yeah,
And you're herding around the fourth herd.
Well, it's kind of an extension of the third. Sometimes they call it the fourth, but actually it's still an extension of the third.
Well, now you might just give us a little bit of the lineage and how this works. Actually, it started with a band that played the blues, didn't it?
Yeah, we had that band for a number of years, and then along about 44, I guess it was, we organized the first herd, and that lasted through until the end of 46. The second herd was started the latter part of 47 and lasted until about 50. And the first herd started all along about 1951, and it's been in action, the third herd, I should say, ever since.
Well, actually, these bands stand for important soloists and, mighty creative people, including yourself. For example, in that first herd, such names as, you call them off.
Well, there were some pretty great guys, people like Bill Harris, although he was a member of all three herds, and I guess we shouldn't even include him in just being a member of one. But there were people like Flip Phillips, Chubby Jackson, Pete Condoli, Conrad Gazzo, Sonny Berman, Billy Bauer, Ralph Burns, Davy Tuff, and later Don Lamont. And I guess I can go on for a little bit more.
Well, now the second herd takes in some other outstanding musicians, too.
Yeah, well, it was made up of people like the Brothers, which included Zoot Sims, Herbie Stewart in the beginning, and Stan Getz, and Sir Shelloff. And Sam Meritz was always the lead alto player in that, in both the first and the second herds. And that band included Earl Swope and also Bill Harris. And then in the trumpets we had people like Ernie Royal, Marky Markowitz, Shorty Rogers. I'm hung for the moment.
Well, I'm sure that you have so many names to remember, and it covers so many areas of fine solo work as well as interesting personalities. As a leader, if I mention, several key words to you like this, if I mention to you, say, Gus Arnheim, what do you say?
Well, he was a very wonderful man, and it was a distinct pleasure having been a member of his band, even though it was for a very short time. I did a theater tour with Gus. And actually, I didn't play in the band in the section or anything. I just did a couple tunes on my own. I was, my former vaudeville background, I guess, made me a sing-a-lo on occasion.
The Isom Jones band, of course, brings up another interesting thought or two.
Well, that was the last band that I was a member of prior to starting the first Herman group. And the first band we started was along about the end of 1936 when Isham decided to retire.
Well, now if I mention to you jazz festivals, what do you say?
Well, I think that one of the best is Monterey, and I'm sure that there'll be others that are also equally impressive. I recently enjoyed doing the one at Madison Square Garden that the Daily News sponsored in New York, and also enjoyed doing the Boston Arts Festival recently.
And along with the thoughts on jazz festivals, do any of them relate to circuses in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, on occasion, I guess. We haven't been subjected to those groupings, though, so I guess I'm really not a good person to ask that question.
Oh, seriously, Woody, what hopes do you have for the organizations of bands and their tours and their reception with audiences? Is there a new audience growing for them?
Well, I think so. In other words, the backbone of what's left of the band business, the backbone of our dates are still the colleges, and after all, this is the grouping that made the bands happen the first time around. And there seems to be a definite interest there, plus the fact that we have a worldwide thing going for some of us, and it's kept us alive and kept us feeling that we're of some import, because when we visit other lands and other countries, we find that there's a tremendous amount of interest.
Along that line, Woody, certainly jazz is an international language in every sense of the word. And to what countries seem to produce the most interesting jazz in your mind?
Well, I think that probably the Scandinavian countries have produced some very good talents, outstanding talents. And I think England now is probably one of the more productive countries. as far as the modern-day jazz musicians are concerned.
I can think of soloists like Kenny Graham and the Johnny Dankworth Band, as well as Ted Heath and so many others in the New Orleans clubs of Great Britain, which are a lot of fun.
That's right.
Well, one other thought along this line, you've organized an extension of the Third Herd, and certainly there are important young men in that band, and maybe you'd just like to point out for some of the people who will be seeing and hearing you in the month of July who those men are.
We have some very, I think, great budding talents in the band. As a matter of fact, this is one of the happiest groups that I've had in a couple of 3 seasons. And it includes people like Jimmy Campbell on drums and Jimmy Gwynn in the trombone section, who does a great deal of the soloing, and Rolf Erickson in the trumpet section, along with Bill Chase, our lead trumpeter, and Bill Berry, another great jazz player. In the saxophone department, we have people like Don Lanfear and Jimmy Mosier on baritone, and I think it makes for a very exciting band.
It certainly sounds it, because I've just caught a little bit of it off the phone here. And when you mention Rolf Erickson, that gives you a completely international picture, because he was one of the Swedish Estrad Poll winners.
That's right.
Well, Woodrow, you're very gracious to take time off a busy night, and one-nighters are rather trying sometimes. Thanks for your goodwill.
Thank you, Leigh.
In 1966, KQRS radio station sent Leigh to cover the Monterey Jazz Festival. He got a wonderful interview from the great trumpeter from New Orleans, Henry Red Allen. Sadly, Red Allen would pass away less than a year after this was recorded.
From Monterey, California, this is Leigh Kamman reporting for QRS Radio to Minneapolis. And here is one of the classic figures behind the 8th annual tribute to the trumpet, Henry Red Allen.
Thank you very much.
Henry, you know, there are a lot of wonderful people here who, you know, as far as tradition is concerned,
yes,
represent the very epitome of jazz, and you're one of them without just singing praises in front of you.
Oh, thank you very much.
I can remember some records that you made back in the 30s that really, you know, could be revived today so beautifully, updated under the current recording conditions.
Thank you for being so nice. Very nice.
I can remember sitting up all night with you and playing records to people who were listening in the New York area.
Yes.
And you revealed to me some very wonderful music that you have of your own personal collection.
Thank you.
Tell me, as far as the trumpet is concerned, how do you feel the modern jazz trumpet player plays his instrument in respect to the way you've learned to play it?
Well, I think great of them, they play the way they wish, and probably, I must say, probably where the people thought that I played when I was coming up. You know,
who influenced you?
Beg pardon?
Who influenced you, Henry?
Well, I had a few guys influence me, such guys as Kid Rene, Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, several guys, Quinch Miller, Chris Kelly. I listened to them all, and I really got a kick out of them. Matter of fact, it's not too much different between Louis and Armstrong and I in age, and but he's always one of my great admirers.
And you come from that influence known as New Orleans, in a sense?
Well, that's where I was born. I was born in Algiers, which is West New Orleans, but I always had a happy feeling there, and I must say it must be New Orleans because I didn't hear it anywhere else.
There were some great themes that have been forgotten. Do you think they should remain history and museum pieces, or brought to life in a new arrangement or concept? Do you think they would be accepted?
Well, sure it'll be. I mean, you know, Benjamin Franklin is still around, you know, although we have great things going on, but he's the one started all for other things that we have today. And they remember him, they remember Lincoln, they remember George Washington, and I think that we should be remembered. The only thing that we're happy to be around.
I didn't mean in reference to the people so much as I did to the music which they played.
Yes, well, that's a part of the world, music, and well, that's all we have to. Well, it's a big part of the America music, I think. And I think that we played a big part in it.
What do you think the future for jazz is under rock and roll conditions?
Well, we don't care. Everything dashes in every moment, but we still stick it out.
Referring to jazz in the future.
Well, jazz in the future will still be around, just like the spirituals. They're still around. That's been on for years, and they're still around, and most sure we will be around for years. I don't mean livelihood, but our music and spirit will still be going on.
Henry Red Allen, thanks so very much for your comments.
I want to thank you, and thank you for the invite. And hello to all the people that still keeps it around. Thank you. Nice.
Good night.
Good night.
Henry Red Allen from the Monterey Jazz Festival, Monterey, California. This is Leigh Kamman reporting for KQRS Radio in Minneapolis.
Our final segments feature a rare and fascinating interview with the legendary stride piano player Joe Turner from a nightclub in Paris in 1974. Joe talks about his move to Paris in 1947 and why he stayed, which is probably the reason he's not better known. These segments are recorded just after visiting fireman Dizzy Gillespie had just finished sitting in with Joe at that Paris club, La Calavados.
It's April in Paris, and that, of course, it's a poetic thought. And here we are, very close to the Champs-Élysées, not too far from the Arc de Triomphe, several thousand miles from the very center of things, New York, and then westward over the Hudson to St. Paul and Minneapolis in the mid-continent. Somewhere around 1947, a man by the name of Joe Turner was appearing at the Dome in Minneapolis. This is Joe Turner who strides the piano, not Joe Turner who sings the blues. We found Joe very close to the Arc de Triomphe at La Calavados, and it's good to hear you and share with you our feelings about your music. Joe Turner, greetings, enchanté.
Thank you very much. And when I was playing at the Dome, I would like to mention the fact that Paige Cavanaugh was also playing there in a trio of his. And I left there and took a plane to New York City and arrived in New York City just in time to catch the boat for Europe. I was to arrive in Europe and stay for 2 weeks to pick up my family that I had left in Budapest several years ago. And I was only to stay here for 2 weeks. But the 2 weeks turned out to be 27 years. Incidentally, shortly after my arrival here, I played the 2 weeks with prolongations. And after 3 months here, working steadily through, I had contracts in my pocket for the next 2 years. And so I decided that I would stay here instead of going back home, breaking in layoffs.
Europe in your blood, Joe Turner. The jazz scene began to turn, and you began to find a whole new reference point, but in spite of that, your tradition and its influences prompt the following questions. You're a stride pianist. They're a rare breed of cat.
That's right. I think there are about 3 stride pianists that I know of left in the world today. That's Willie the Lion Smith, and a little fellow who's not so well known, who's a terrific stride man, Willie Gant, and myself. And I think that's one of the reasons I've been recalled to New York to play at the Newport Jazz Festival, because I imagine they would like to hear a little more stride piano, and a lot of youngsters would really like to know what it's about, I think.
I'll be back to talk with you in just a moment about stride piano and some of the people that influenced you. I've been talking with Joe Turner, and this is Paris, France, and poetically it is April in Paris. C'est froid, but very warm at the same time. Joe, it's a pleasure hearing you here at La Calvados in Paris.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And my main reason for staying in the Calvados, because I have a family here, a wife and 2 kids. My kids are doing very well in school. I'm making more or less a financial sacrifice by staying here, but my family, at least, are having a home here. I don't have to be running all over the world to make a living, and at least they know that Papa is coming home every night. And it's really worth it to me.
Joe Turner, the stride pianist, one of the outstanding exponents of the stride style in traditional jazz. This is Leigh Kamman, Somewhere in Paris. Here we are in Paris, believe it or not, and the poetic theme is April in Paris. And this is La Calvados. We're on the right bank of the Seine, really, I suppose, not the left bank, and it's getting into the wee small hours. Dizzy Gillespie is sitting over here on my right, and on my left is Joe Turner, and Joe Turner is an exponent of a rare and vintage style of the jazz piano, the stride. And somewhere in the background I heard a little bit of Django Reinhardt, played by the Los Latinos.
I recorded with Django Reinhardt, Django and Stefan Grappelli, and the record I have of that recording is more or less a souvenir for me.
And I did hear that theme in the background, but to the subject of the stride piano, how would you describe that style?
Well, that particular style, more or less, in the wee hours of the morning, I'm playing mostly for the tourists that are coming into the Calvados, and I play a lot of show music and waltzes and what have you, and I don't really do too much striding at this hour in the morning.
How do you describe that style, Joe Turner?
Which style?
The stride style.
Stride style, well, it was something you had to live with. It isn't something that can be taught to you. It has been taught to many people, but they have never really gotten it because it is a thing you have to really live. And that's why it's such a rare thing. Because if you didn't live it, you'll never be able to play it.
Was it influenced by show business in the dance at all?
Well, I think the one that really started it was James P. Johnson, and then taken over by Fat Swallow, and then there were other...
I know you'd mentioned Willie Gantz.
Willie Gantz and Willie the Lion Smith. And then after that, there were not too many who picked it up because it wasn't the easiest thing to play. It's something that has to almost be born in you.
The tempos seem to be almost a strut, if you can call it that.
Yeah, you can call it that, more or less.
Is that
I think that's a wonderful description.
How about the melodic concept, the way you put the melody together?
Well, I think it's the melody taken from whatever composition you're playing and put into stride.
Which is that strutting.
And so, more or less, when you hear stride pianists, if you know the song that they're playing, you'll recognize it because the melody is there.
Joe Turner, thank you very much for letting me just sort of probe into your feelings about music. One thought before we leave. What has jazz and your involvement with the jazz piano done for your life?
Jazz and my involvement in jazz has made me the man that I am. Be it big or small, it has made me the man that I am.
Joe Turner, from
pardon.
La Calvados, a snack bar and restaurant not too far from the Arc de Triomphe. This is Leigh Kamman from Paris. Max Jones in Melody Maker magazine, one of the English music journals, wrote, if we talked about Joe Turner like we talk about the two Sonny Boy Williamsons, I suppose we would have to call the piano-playing Joe Turner number one, as distinguished from the singing Joe Turner of Wee Baby Blues fame. Joe Turner on the scene at La Calvados in Paris, France, not too far from the Champs-Élysées. Joe, we were talking the other night about some of the men that you associated with in jazz, and who were some of the most remarkable impressions in your memory? Who were the people that influenced you?
Well, I can truthfully say that one that influenced me most was Fats Waller and James P. Johnson. And the one who helped me the most was Benny Carter. Because when I played in Benny Carter's orchestra for 3 years, he helped me musically more than I could ever have imagined. And in fact, it used to be a saying that when you played in Benny Carter's orchestra, you had to be a number one musician. And he has turned out more good musicians than anyone that I have ever known. He's the most underrated genius of our time. I call him a genius because not only did he play several instruments, but he helped his musicians. And he was never the one who was very, shall we say, hard with his musicians. If there was a passage or something in the arrangement that you didn't do well, he would smile and say, man, take it to the shed. And you would be ashamed to come back the next night without knowing it. Because the next day you would go to the shed and you would come back with it correct. And I must say, because of Benny Carter, I progressed 1,000% in my playing and ideas in the world of jazz.
How else would you describe Benny Carter? He certainly was and is today one of the most versatile of musicians, doing scores for film, not playing as much, I suppose, as he used to, except in perhaps recording soundtracks. But as a human being, how would you describe Benny Carter?
As a human being, he was number one, a gentleman. Number two, a genius in music. And his arrangements were superb.
I remember now you mentioned Fats Waller. And just how does Fats figure in your history and influence?
Well, number one, Fats Waller was the closest friend I ever had in my life. And I've seen him drink whiskey as though it was going out of style, but I've never seen him drunk. And he was always the jolly fellow of our times. And he was the same on or off stage. Fats Waller was the greatest human being I've ever known in my life, I can truthfully say.
Joe Turner, a pleasure hearing you describe the character of Benny Carter and of Fats Waller. I know you're on call to go on stage,
yes,
so we'll stand by here and talk with you a little bit later.
Beautiful.
Joe Turner from La Calvados here in Paris, France. And it is April in Paris, and the jazz influences in this very slick bistro can be heard ever so slightly between and among the scotch, the martinis, the wine, and the brandy. And this is Leigh Kamman via the Champs-Élysées and 40 Avenue Pierre, the Premier des Sœurs.
Kamman left an immense archive of printed and recorded materials from his life in jazz. They are a source of pride for our community. Throughout his career, Leigh showcased both renowned and struggling jazz artists, and happily, he made those moments available to all of us. His enigmatic aura that wafted over the radio waves was not only uplifting, but left us culturally richer. The Leigh Kamman Legacy Project, a 501c3 nonprofit corporation in St. Paul, Minnesota, is committed to preserving and sharing these archives. Please contact us at our website, leighkamman.com, or our Facebook page if you'd like to contribute or be involved in helping us. Thanks.